personalization was a huge word within the entrepreneurship space. I think AI has taken over everything now, but I think in similar thought, personalization is so important. And I feel like maybe that makes accessibility more clear and equity more clear, is that you want to cater to your specific users. I feel like it's a great experience to be able to go on whatever app and see things that you like, or do a search and see clothing or hairstyle that responds to indicators of things that you like. I think the potential for personalization in any industry is really important to make people feel like you're individually serving them. I think data gives us a lot of ways to be able to do that within reason, to meet users where they're at and to make sure that they're having an experience that makes sense for them. And we talked earlier about the one size fits all. I think it's obvious that it doesn't, and it's very hard to design a solution that meets the needs of everyone. And so I think along those lines, if you can go the personalization route, designing for who has the most need and working out from there, it really paves a pathway for how your product can serve the needs of people, I think, across a large scale, and also give them that feel of personalization, like this works for my needs specifically.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Okay, so here's something to think about. When you started your business, you had a vision. You knew who you wanted to serve, the impact you wanted to make, and the value you wanted to bring. But have you considered whether the way you are delivering that value actually meets the diverse needs of your audience? Not everyone learns, engages, or consumes information in the same way. And if your business isn't designed with accessibility and customization in mind, you could be missing out on serving a much broader audience. That's why today we're diving into how to create more inclusive and customizable solutions for diverse learners with my guest, Kianjai Huggan. She's an engineer, educator, and entrepreneur who specializes in leveraging technology to make learning more accessible. As the founder of Webquity, she's helping bridge the digital accessibility gap, ensuring that people with different learning styles and abilities have the tools they need to thrive. So in this episode, we're discussing why a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work, how accessibility impacts the Black community, and the small but impactful changes you can make to better serve your audience. No matter what industry you're in, this is a conversation that will challenge you to rethink how you engage with your audience and build a business that truly reaches the people who need it most. So let's get into it. Kianjai, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. It is a treat to have you on the show, so welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be able to have a conversation with you today.
Yes, I'm excited that you're excited because this is something that we haven't talked about on the Black to Business Podcast. And we're going to talk all about the fact that one size does not fit all in building customizable solutions for diverse learners. So if we could just start by, if you could just share a little bit about you, who you are, and what is it that you do in your business, and how did you get here?
Yes, of course. So I would like to say that my journey started just with the curiosity of learning. Growing up, I really liked robotics in particular, anything that was science fiction, and the allure that you could create anything if you had the tools to do so. And so from there, I was super interested in engineering. I went on to be on a robotics team, really followed the track to college to study engineering at the University of Connecticut. And throughout that time, I had the privilege of falling in love with education. I worked in a ton of summer programs. I wasn't interested in the typical, I think, engineering internships that you might think of, because I really liked teaching students about STEM and about engineering. And so that's where my passion for engineering started as well. And I still wanted to use my engineering skills. It's a long 4 years. So wanted to still leverage those skills. And so I found myself at the intersection of education and technology and went down the route of ed tech. And so post undergrad, I went on to work for a nonprofit called Black Girls Code during 2020. And I highlight that because it was the height of the pandemic. And I think, as many of us probably experienced, we transitioned to online. Not well, but we had to, especially in the educational space. And I noticed a lot of the students that I was working with were struggling with consuming content online, just their attention spans, some having longer times to consume information. And I really pointed to the needs of students with visual impairments and dyslexia and how content could be accommodated for their needs. And so, in working with students at the time, it looked like a lot of hours of just manually creating content, even in other programs I was working in, to make sure students had what they need. But leaning back on an engineering background, I really thought that we could automate that I didn't have to put in all this time. We could customize it to each student's needs, as education should be catered, in my opinion. And so that was where my entrepreneurial journey of creating Webquity, a mashup of web equity, was born, with the goal of creating tools to ensure digital accessibility for students.
Oh wow, such an amazing background, and I love Black Girls Code. I used to volunteer with the organization as well, so I love the mission. And
Oh,
also, I love that you talk about just like the students and the experiences that you saw there. And what we do at Black to Business is also about educating our audience. So I want to start with first understanding the problem and why one size does not fit all. So, what does it mean when we say one size doesn't fit all when it comes to like education and in business?
yeah, I think starting with education, it really looks at the ways in which people learn. And so, how are we looking at, I think what's most common is like the type of learner that you are, whether it's auditory, whether it's visual, things like that. And I think stemming off of that, it acknowledges that we're all different, that we can consume information and gain skills likely in different ways. And how can we accommodate that? And I feel like the as adverse reaction to that in the past, or maybe why it wasn't seen as feasible as it is now, is because technology comes into the conversation. I think if you think about a teacher that has 25 kids in their class and each kid has very unique needs, it's much better approach to create an accessible, like as possible curriculum and way of teaching versus catering to each individual student. I think if you're prioritizing time of that teacher, the preparation that goes into that, I would agree that it's unreasonable for that to be done. But then once we're able to leverage technology and expedite how those students are served, identifying their unique needs and acknowledging that they each have a path to what they define as success in the educational environment and how can we support that. I think technology makes it possible without putting the burden on teachers who are already doing a lot. And so being able to meet students where they're at. And so that's where I see the balance conversation there. So acknowledging what students' needs are, but also being able to give teachers a pathway to do that as well. And I think similarly in business, the unique journeys of how do you deliver your value proposition. I always like to say, because I feel like we're no stranger to it, you all are no stranger to the fact that a ton of businesses fail within their first year. There's all of these pretty depressing statistics. But I like to tell
Yes.
myself that you have the flexibility to get it wrong. Like maybe what I do right now, our product, digital glasses, isn't the right solution for my problem. But regardless of that, the problem still exists. So there's still the opportunity to solve it. And I think catering to your individual journey and your needs along discovering that path as an entrepreneur is really important. Because I feel like there's so much pressure to get it right. But I think it's more so the focus on the problem. And in order to get to a great solution, I think lots of times you have to get it wrong along that journey. Yeah.
Yes, I certainly agree. And also the fact, like you said, that learn technology expedites the process, especially these days. I want to talk about how the lack of customization in learning or even just business solutions impacts like underrepresented communities because of course this is the Black to Business podcast. So how this uniquely impacts even just our experiences.
Yeah, something that really stuck out to me in decisions that I made with Webquity is that when you think about, in my case, like digital accessibility tools, tools that are provided traditionally for students with disabilities, that in itself has systemic issues that particularly affect Black people. It assumes that you have the privilege to get a diagnosis early on enough, and your school that you go to has the tools to meet the needs of whatever diagnosis that you're given. And a lot of times that isn't the case. And so, particularly with Webquity, we went away from the route that links like providing these tools if you have said diagnosis to qualify for them, and really look at a broad approach of how we can provide these tools to everyone, acknowledging that everyone has unique needs, even though we focus on the needs of students with dyslexia and visual impairments, acknowledging that everyone needs access to it and trying to avoid those barriers that are very distinct. And so I think even taking a step back from that specific to Webquity and just generally in education, I think there's a lot of privilege in being able to know what your needs are at the start to even know how to address them. And so really being able to shift our mindset to that unique learner profile, I think is really important in starting to have those conversations and making sure that the tools on the other side and like solutions on the other side of that aren't limited by systems that likely aren't considering the access problems, especially for Black people in this case as well.
Yeah, certainly in perspective there. And Kianjai, what about, so you kind of did in the beginning talk about Webquity and what you all do, but I would love it if you can go into more details because you just also mentioned the digital glasses.
Yes, and so for Webquity, we're a digital accessibility company. Our first product is digital glasses. It's a web extension that works across any website, customizing it to a unique user's needs. So being able to transform that website to have dyslexic friendly text. Text to speech is available on any website that you're on. Changing the color contrast to reduce eye strain. Really being able to give you a customized user experience across any website. As we know, all websites are not created equal. Some are less accessible than others. A ton of websites don't even meet the accessibility standards that are in place. And so we really wanted to ensure no matter where you go on the internet, you can have that user profile. And we call it digital glasses because in order to use the plugin, you go through a small questionnaire, choosing the text size, the font, all of those things. And we see it as writing your prescription. And so when you use the extension, digital glasses, you're able to have that experience anywhere across the web.
That is so cool because someone I would think like, oh, these are not actual glasses. That is so cool. So I'm so glad that you explained that because even just for personal experience and being in business, it wasn't until the most recent years that I started to hear conversations about web accessibility and kind of like that inclusivity. I don't think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs are aware of. So can you talk about the examples of or what accessibility gaps you see in digital learning?
Yeah, I think, and I'd like to attack it from two angles. So I think there's
Mm-hmm.
general accessibility standards everyone has access to. It's a priority. And when you're hosting a website, that it is accessible to ensure that people can access the content equitably. I think that think about websites that have just poor formatting in terms of lots of cluttered text. There's checks for like color contrast. So even on the site itself, is there enough contrast that you're able to read clearly? Like if you have like a white page with yellow text on it, that's less than ideal. And I feel like these things that sound very basic, but across the internet, I believe it's about like 90% of websites aren't accessible. And that opens up this large entrepreneurship opportunity. And so other businesses in the space that I've seen typically target the website hosts themselves to work with them to make sure that their website is accessible. Webquity takes the opposite angle of working across all websites to make sure that we can provide a user interface that works. And so that's, I think, what initially comes to mind in terms of the user interface of accessibility. And then you go deeper into those standards to accommodate users that have screen readers, things of that sort. Are you providing alt text? Are they able to navigate the website efficiently? Are you signaling to the user when changes are happening if they're using a screen reader and they maybe aren't able to see the screen? And so taking all of those considerations into play for how someone may interact with your website. And there's tons of guidelines that are very helpful to outline that. It's just more of an effort to make sure that everyone is following that for the ideal case where everyone is able to access these websites equitably.
Certainly. Love that explanation and those two angles. And now that leads me to my next question. So I talk about the fact that a lot of entrepreneurs may not be aware of this. And now I want to talk about the fact that why all entrepreneurs should, regardless of their industry, prioritize that customization and inclusivity in their business models.
Yeah, and I think a word that comes to mind, and I feel like maybe last year or a year or two ago, personalization was a huge word within the entrepreneurship space. I think AI has taken over everything now, but I think in similar thought, personalization is so important, and I feel like maybe that makes accessibility more clear and equity more clear. Is that you want to cater to your specific users. I feel like it's a great experience to be able to go on whatever app and see things that you like, or do a search and see, I don't know, like clothing or hairstyle that responds to indicators of things that you like. I think the potential for personalization in any industry is really important to make people feel like you're individually serving them. I think data gives us a lot of ways to be able to do that within reason, to meet users where they're at and to make sure that they're having an experience that makes sense for them. And we talked earlier about the one size fits all. I think it's obvious that it doesn't, and it's very hard to design a solution that meets the needs of everyone. And so I think along those lines, if you can go the personalization route, designing for who has the most need and working out from there, it really paves a pathway for how your product can serve the needs of people, I think, across a large scale, and also give them that feel of personalization, like this works for my needs specifically. It was a really important balance to have.
And I love that you bring up the personalization part of things. And for entrepreneurs, you talk about the data also. So I want to talk about some of the steps that people who are maybe listening today can take to gather that feedback and really understand the unique needs of their audience. So it might not be everybody, but it's like those unique people within their audience.
Yeah, I think it's really important to identify who has the most need for whatever problem that you're solving. And so I think usually when you have an example problem, I guess like we could use Webquity as an example, like someone's not able to access a website for whatever reason. I think there's a scale of people there. Let's say like the first person, low priority, they just don't like how the site looks. Like maybe it's ugly to them. They don't prefer, it's not a great experience. It's not pretty, and that's a problem, sure. And I think second to that, you have people that maybe it's harder for them to read the website. They can do it. It takes them a longer amount of time. And if they're a student, it impacts the way that they could do work. And that's a higher problem, but they're managing. And then I think you have, let's say, the third person, that really high need use case, like they're not able to use these sites at all. It's impacting their ability to succeed, like academically, if they're a student, significantly, to the point where the solution is a need for them. And that's who you focus on first. I think any information that you can get from that person to just hear about their experience is really important and will inform the next steps that you take. And really being strategic in the way that you ask those questions. I feel like it's really easy to say, this is really a huge problem. Don't you think this is a problem because XYZ? And those are really guiding questions to get the people that you're talking to give you the answer that you want, essentially, because that's your perspective. And so really opening it up to ask, how is your experience with this? And hearing your user's answer so that you can meet that need. And I think also make them feel a part of the process, as a part of personalization, and ensuring accessibility as well, that their input is the high priority for what's informing whatever it is that you'll provide as a product.
Yes, making them a part of the process. Love that. And you also mentioned the fact that technology has really expedited this process of just accessibility. And I want to talk about some of the ways that it plays in making business solutions more accessible and user friendly and even making it more plain.
Yeah, I think when I look at business solutions, we're able to use data to inform like archetypes of businesses. Like if you are like a pet grooming company and you go to like a website builder and you're like, I want to make a website for a pet grooming company, we're able to leverage data from other sites that exist and other resources to produce like your pet grooming website that you need, or whatever it is. And I think with the tools that are coming out now, it takes a lot of pressure off of entrepreneurs, because you don't have to have all the answers, because likely someone else already does. I think you have to identify where it is that you're unique in your value proposition, but you don't have to do all of the work from 0 to 100 anymore, because we have the data to inform what your website could look like or what your marketing plan should be. And being able to leverage resources like those AI builders or chats and things to give you that insight is huge. And that all comes from being able to have that data. And so much of that is handled for us now. I think it gives entrepreneurs the capacity to focus on the creative problem solving, instead of just having to fill in like the desired parameters for your business. Yeah.
And I certainly agree. It's not, you don't have to start from scratch. And I think that that's really helpful because for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially Black entrepreneurs, lack of resources are the reason why we don't start businesses or it's stalling us in the process. So I love that you said that. Also, are there any examples, or maybe even just your own, of businesses that you've seen that have successfully implemented some of these customizable solutions and saw that positive impact?
Yeah, I think definitely for Webquity's experience in our user testing. So we did like the version one of digital glasses. We wanted feedback, and it was amazing to hear. There's this one student, her name is Emily, who has dyslexia, is a college student, and just hearing her feedback that she felt seen. Like she was like, "This is would have helped me like years ago. Like having these tools changed her experience learning online." Like she said, it brought tears to her eyes. And I think that really affirmed for
Oh,
me as well, like as an entrepreneur, that this work matters. Cause I feel like
yeah,
sometimes you're just so in the weeds of like, let's just get whatever it is done. But
yeah.
being able to have interactions like that really shows you the impact that you're having by showing someone that their needs are being taken into consideration versus sort of forcing them to conform to whatever expectation educationally, society wise, that we're supposed to meet. So it really shows people that you care about their problem. And that's huge.
Yeah, that is huge. And thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful. Now you've given us the ways of, creating these customizable solutions, and also most importantly, understanding why one size doesn't fit all. And now I want to kind of talk about bridging the digital divide and making it a priority. So, what are some principles that business owners should keep in mind when they're designing accessible digital experiences?
Yeah, I think when you're looking at prioritizing accessible solutions, especially digitally, we talked earlier about prioritizing the person who has the most needs and then having that conversation with them in a very open way. And then also, we acknowledge the solution side of things, that technology can help really expedite making things accessible, especially in the digital space. But I would also like to call out the consideration that you don't always have to use like the new technology. I think, especially depending on who you're working with. Maybe it's like an older population or a community that just has lower digital literacy, and take that into account. Like technology isn't always the solution. I think it's really exciting. And me as an engineer is always exciting, but it's important to make sure that you have a solution that meets their needs, that is scalable. So you don't want to go from someone who does something like all in paper to having them like interact with ChatGPT to do everything that they need to do, because of the knowledge gap that could present itself there, and just the time it will take you to onboard someone who's not familiar with what you're building. So I think meeting your users where they're at is also important when you're moving into the digital space and thinking about accessibility. Accessibility also means taking into account the level of interaction that people are comfortable with. So just to keep that in mind, so it's not always the newest, fastest solution. It will be the best solution that fits who you're working to provide a product for.
I bet that was a sigh of relief for a lot of people. It was like, whoo, takes that pressure off. And so that is about keeping it simple also. So, what would you say are some of those simple yet effective changes that entrepreneurs can make to improve? Maybe this is the first time they're thinking about digital accessibility. So, what are some of the simple ways, like starting today or soon?
Yeah, I think any way that you're currently taking input from the people that you're selling to or serving, you can leverage to start to incorporate an accessible mindset. So this is like separate from just being digitally. So maybe you say like you have a business where people have to like consult with you before you provide pricing. I think you can highlight the personalization in that. Like you want to meet their needs. You want to have this conversation because you want to make sure that what you provide is customized to the person that's making this request of you. And I think a lot of times business owners are already doing this. I think it's the nature of being an entrepreneur, is wanting to make your customers and the people that you're working for happy. And so I think you can just call out the language there, and that makes a huge difference to being able to say, book a call with me so we can discuss your needs and make a customized solution or approach that will help you like today, versus saying like, book a consultation call with me to determine pricing. And I think those slight changes in language can really make the customers feel seen and create a pathway to how you start forming a mission that's around accessibility and incorporating that into how your business is structured. And digitally, you can look at how you present that marketing along the lines of marketing efforts, making sure that you include accessible language. And I think just being able to Google like accessible phrases for marketing should give you a lot of ideas as well. Yeah, I think entrepreneurs are already inherently doing their best to specifically serve their customers and wanting to be accessible. So just calling it out more can make a really big difference.
Yes, that's good and very actionable, those slight changes in language. And Kia, I'm sure when you were going, one of the things you mentioned is a lot of entrepreneurs probably already are doing some of these things, like simple ways. But I feel like it also can be when we're thinking about things, we can go down a rabbit hole. So, how can entrepreneurs balance that customization with scalability in their business?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a concern around being able to maintain what's working currently and also being able to test and scale without the pressure of being able to get it right the first time. And I think with suggestions like what we just talked about, like the changes in language, those small incremental changes will help you build up to a scale where you'll have the right indicators that is appropriate for you to move towards like maybe a fully like accessible consulting approach and things of that sort. So I think the smaller ways that you can test that you're getting the right signals as you move towards scaling up and creating those opportunities will make a huge difference.
Certainly. And any tools or useful resources available that can help entrepreneurs implement accessibility and that customization?
Yeah, I would start with, especially if you're in terms of just like website general hosting, looking at the WCAG, WCAG guidelines for web accessibility, just to get a baseline of what users visiting your website's needs are. Simple, there's like color contrast checkers that are Google Chrome plugins, so you can check like the contrast of your website to make sure it's okay, or even not just like your website, your flyers, if you have print materials, any digital asset or something that could be printed could be checked in that way. So I think that's huge to make sure that your information is being communicated effectively. And then outside of that, once you're able to get like familiar with those guidelines, I think really consulting, like we said about how a lot of AI chatbots and things leverage a lot of data, being able to like go online to chat with ChatGPT to see ideas around accessibility specific to your business, and seeing what ideas get generated there, I feel like gives you a lot to go off of, especially when you just want to start getting some ideas since you might not have things in mind depending on your experience with accessibility.
Perfect. And I'll definitely be sure to put those resources in the show notes. So, what would you say one mindset shift entrepreneurs need to make to start embracing accessibility and customization?
I think the mind shift is to what we said earlier around like the problem that teachers faced around accessibility and like personalization more so than accessibility. It can feel like a lot. I feel like you have to meet the individual needs of each person, figuring out what they need, and might have a lot of customers. Prayerfully, you do have a lot of customers, and it can be a lot to feel like you need to individually sit down and think about these persons on people on a one-to-one like level. But I'd encourage you to shift the perspective that personalization makes things easier. It makes your customers happier when you're able to meet more people's needs through addressing them individually and looking at people as individuals. You do end up having that lift, that ease of being able to accommodate multiple customer needs. Yeah, so instead of looking at it as like a burden of like how do we take all this information and make sure that something works for a ton of people, being able to shift that to taking the time to really understand my customers and who they are will make my business more profitable and also give you a better understanding of how to pave that path forward. It's definitely worth the time investment there.
Yes, definitely worth it in the long run. This has been a phenomenal conversation. I would love it if you could share some of the ways or maybe services or support that you offer that can help our listeners implement these strategies or just stay in the know of what's going on.
But specifically for Webquity, we have our website, webquityed.com. So it's webquityed.com, where you can download digital glasses to try it out. We love any feedback that anyone would like to provide, or just thoughts on how we're navigating this journey or things that you've heard throughout this podcast. Really open to any feedback that you have. And then also me as an individual, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have general questions around like entrepreneurship and how I went about my journey and fundraising and all of those things. Happy to answer any questions through LinkedIn as well.
Love that. And speaking of your journey, you shared it also in the beginning. I would love to know what advice or, yeah, what advice would you give to someone in their first year of business?
My advice would be to really look at the entrepreneurship communities around you, local to you, or even that you can find online. I think the most important thing going into business is finding that community of entrepreneurs who are going through the same things. I think entrepreneurship can feel lonely a lot of times, especially the first year getting started. You probably don't have a team of people. It's probably just you up very late through the nights trying to figure things out. And so the faster you can find community, I think that propels your journey forward and the confidence that you'll have to continue moving forward. So looking for entrepreneurship communities along those lines. There's resources for funding smaller entrepreneurs, like non-dilutive funding, whether it's like a pitch competition or maybe participate in an accelerator. I think there's a ton of opportunities now with entrepreneurship continuing to grow and programs supporting it. So looking for those, I think, can give you a nice foundation for how you'd want to move forward and to give you the knowledge of what options are out there for yourself.
Well said. And Kia, what's the best risk that you've taken?
I think the best risk that I've taken is trusting my expertise. And the experience that I have, I think a lot of times, especially for like in my case, I studied engineering. So I did a lot of things in that area. But I had mentioned that I fell in love with education. I didn't have any formal education training, wasn't like a K through 12 teacher, nothing like that. And so I questioned, like, am I like fit to do an ed tech business? I don't really have the education side. And I wanted to get that. And so I ended up applying to Harvard for a master's of education degree with no huge track record in education. I think everything that I did was definitely a lot of work, like creating programs and working with students. It was non-traditional, but I did a ton in the educational space, but I still wasn't sure. And I think getting accepted to Harvard at that time was the risk that I took to decline the job offer that I had in engineering at that time and apply for a master's of education degree without a ton of
Wow.
experience in that area. And I got accepted and I was able
Mm-hmm.
to go through that program, and it gave me the credentials on paper that I had that education experience. And I'm glad that I believed in myself to take that risk. I think didn't have the traditional education. It's Harvard, so the acceptance rate is low, but something in me told me to take that risk and bet on myself. And it paid off very surprisingly to me at the time, but it really propelled my entrepreneurial journey after that as well with the connections I was able to make.
That is amazing. Yeah, that is a good best risk. Yeah, I love that and inspiring. My last question is, what does it mean to you to be Black in business?
Yeah, I love that question. I feel like what it means to me is to make sure that I'm bringing myself to the spaces that I'm in. So, being Black in business, I think bringing my culture into those spaces, having that really inclusive and insight. I think it's not a surprise that my focus is around accessibility and equity. Having the experience being a Black person in America and knowing the challenges that come around those issues in so many areas, I just chose education. I think my lived experience really informs why I'm able to do the work that I do well. And when I go into those spaces, making sure, I always say, to never leave part of yourself outside of the door. Even though I work in a lot of places that aren't representative and don't have a lot of Black representation, making sure that I'm not trying to conform to those spaces, but expand them with what I'm bringing into that room. And so, yeah, I think really just focusing on who I am and not losing sight of that to fit the profile of what an entrepreneur might be or what an engineer might be or anything of that sort. It's really keeping my identity at the forefront and making sure to lift others along that journey because that's important as well.
Yes, you are so right. And I love, love, love that. If you could just share again, how can people find you, connect with you, and support you?
Yeah, and so for Webquity, you can visit webquityed.com, webquityed.com. And personally, you connect with me on LinkedIn, Kianjai Huggan. So feel free to connect with me there and reach out if you have any questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being on the Black to Business podcast and sharing what you do. And we celebrate you and we appreciate you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's a wrap. We had an incredible conversation with Kianjai Huggan about why one size does not fit all when it comes to learning, business, and accessibility. And this conversation was honestly a reminder that as entrepreneurs, it's not just about what we offer, it's about how we deliver it and who we're making space for. So I had so many takeaways, but here are just a few. One, accessibility is more than a checkbox. It's an opportunity to reach more people and create a real impact. And many businesses are unknowingly leaving potential customers behind simply because their content or services aren't designed to meet diverse needs. And then 2, personalization isn't just good for customers, it's good for business. So the more you tailor your offerings, the more stronger your customer relationships and the more trust you build in your brand. And then the third thing, technology is making it easier than ever to customize and improve accessibility. I really like this one. So whether it's an AI-powered solution or simple tweaks to your website and messaging, there are tools that can help you meet people where they are. And then the fourth thing is Black entrepreneurs in particular must prioritize accessibility and inclusivity. So our communities have historically been underserved, and by taking that extra step to create customized, inclusive experiences, we are pushing the culture forward in a meaningful way. And so this is the type of conversation that honestly challenges us to rethink how we do business and to honestly be more intentional about who we're serving. So if you found value in today's episode, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with another entrepreneur who needs to hear it. And also for more resources mentioned in this episode, you can head over to black2business.com/244. I want to thank you so much for being a part of the Black to Business family. Honestly, your support and commitment to growth is what keeps us moving forward. And with that being said, make sure you are subscribed so that you don't miss next week's episode. But until then, keep building boldly and keep pushing the culture forward. Later.